All right. Yeah, if you could pull that close to you and...
Okay, we're good?
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, okay. Y'all ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hello and welcome, friends, to another edition of Sustainability Now with me, Justin Mog, right here on your community radio station. We are WFMP LP Louisville. We broadcast to you from high atop this historic Hayburn building. I'm going to emphasize history today and preservation on this show. We broadcast at 106.5 FM, but we also live stream anywhere you are in the world. You can catch us at forwardradio.org. And while you're there, we always want you to get involved in this people-powered radio. Perhaps you could be a volunteer with us. You could get your own show or do a one-time access hour or something like that. And we also rely entirely on your support to stay on the air. So if you can donate today at forwardradio.org, that'll help keep us going and preserve our station. Well, what we're going to do today is talk about preservation and historical preservation, especially here in our urban core. I've got two excellent guests in the studio to discuss this topic. Steve Wiser is here from the Louisville Historical League. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Justin.
So
glad to be here.
Yes, we've been in conversation.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to finally get you behind the microphone. And I believe returning to the show, I think you've been here before.
Yeah.
Martina Kunnecke is here from Neighborhood Planning and Preservation. We've had many things to talk about.
Many things. Always a lot on the plate.
So if you want to learn more about these organizations, you can follow them at LouisvilleHistoricalLeague.org or find Neighborhood Planning and Preservation on Facebook. Y'all want to start with a quick overview of what your organizations do and the sort of the fights you've been engaged in here locally?
Well, I'll start first with the Louisville Historical League. Again, I'm Steve Wiser. I'm president of the league. Been president for many years. I've yet to find who will take over for me. But anyways, we've been around since 1972, so we're 52 years old. And we're dedicated to the preservation of Louisville's cultural and built environment heritage. We primarily, we do a broad range of topics. And one thing that sets us apart from other historical groups in the area is we like to go where the history is made. So we actually go to the locations where certain things occurred at, if you will. So we don't, our permanent home is the Peterson Dumanil House in Crescent Hill, but we're rarely there. We're always out, whether it's Locust Grove or Farmington, or we were just at a historic black church there in the Portland neighborhood. This coming month in October, we're going to be in the Germantown neighborhood having a meeting there. And so, yeah, we're all over. And we've been videoing all of our talks since COVID. That really got us into the digital age.
Yeah.
And so we've been putting up on YouTube all of our events over the past several years. And so if you go to YouTube and look for Louisville Historical League, our channel, you can subscribe to that.
Fantastic.
We have over 100 videos up on Louisville history there that you can scroll through and find out more about the local history. So we've been doing that. And so, yeah, we're a very active organization. And by the way, coming in 2025, we're dropping our membership dues. It's going to be a free organization.
Oh, cool.
We're going for, one thing we have found is the younger generation does not like to go out to events much anymore. They like to look things on their screens, if you will.
Sure.
And so we're trying to entice the younger generations to come out off their computers and actually live in the real world, if you will, and come out to our activities. So by not having a membership dues, we think hopefully, so if you're a younger person, want to know about local history, feel free to get on our website, find out where our events are at, and join us. We have a lot of great things. You can get out, and if you're a new resident of the city, you can find out a lot about the city through our events.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what we do, primarily history, and we do some preservation, which Martina will soon talk about, but we're sort of more of a support group on preservation. We provide more of the history side of it, they provide more of the preservation side, so that sort of differentiates us.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Martina.
In other words, the Louisville Historical League is much nicer than MPP.
Sometimes, walk softly and carry a big stick.
Right.
Well, you know, MPP came into existence in 2003, and it was the brainchild of some folks in the Clifton area, Butchertown, some of our folks out near Jefferson County Forest, and some of our community partners out River Road.
Oh,
and
okay.
it came about as a reaction to a proposed development on Frankfurt Avenue that ended up getting rid of the last urban farm in the Clifton area. So we've been at it since 2003, and we put our hands in a lot of pies, a lot of pies. So we are an advocacy group. We support neighborhoods east, west, and south, suburban, urban, and we still have some countryside in the Louisville area. So we help neighborhoods all over the place, advocate in various issues like environmental justice issues. So
huge.
we help pull together the group that defeated the methane plants in the California and Russell area. We've been involved in issues regarding TIFs, the growing number of TIFs in the community that are being requested by large developers. But preservation is a very important element of what MPP is, neighborhood planning first and preservation. And when those issues come up, we reach out to various community partners in terms of landmarking elements in the community, reuse. We're very much into reuse. The greenest building are the existing buildings.
Yes.
And so at times like those, when there are buildings at risk, we reach out to our community partners who may or may not support us on support us on any given thing. But
okay, so you've already sort of touched a little bit there, Martina, on the connections between historical preservation and sustainability, which is solutions forward focused. How do we move forward to create a better tomorrow? There are some who make the case that let's not be stuck in the past. You know, things obviously weren't perfect in the past either, so why cling to the past? Shouldn't we just go forward with progress? What do you say to those types of critics?
Well, my first response is anything that's been built 50 years or older is eligible to be called historic. And quite frankly, anything that's going to be built now, and some of my architect friends may disagree with me, but anything we build now is going to have a much more limited lifespan, we feel, than what has been built in the past. So that's the first thing. The second thing, we keep going back to that environmental issue. You know, there's waste when you're bringing down buildings that were built to last for a long, long time. The greenest buildings are the existing buildings. So in terms of good planning and more environmentally sensitive planning, we need to keep that uppermost. Now, in this community, we've had problems because we have folks whose raison d'etre is to develop, build.
Ka-ching,
And
ka-ching, ka-ching.
yeah, and I want them to make a living. But there's a difference between development that's just totally profit-driven and development that's actually going to meet the needs and the values of this community.
Right.
So we've had a problem speaking out of both sides of our mouth in this community. On one hand, you hear folks say, oh, I'm a preservation, I love blah, 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 but. And so, but the good news is, there's a group of people, Gen Xers, the millennials, those folks, I've been waiting and waiting for them because they are looking for ways to reuse properties. They are looking at ways to take what we have to set up small shops, to build a home, to build, and we're in a weird space now because everything is so expensive. But I do believe that the mindset, the cultural mindset is shifting in a way that's going to be more supportive of our efforts.
We're speaking mostly about buildings, but this notion of preservation, of course, also applies to green spaces, right? And we see great examples of that in the love of our homestead parks, for instance, here in Louisville, right?
Correct. And by the way, I wanted to echo a little bit what Martina was saying. I think when you're talking to city officials and other developers, you have to talk economically. You can't talk aesthetics, you can't talk historic events that happen at a certain location. You have to talk economic viability of these structures. And a few years ago, the Louisville Visitor Center did a survey as to why Louisvillians, or not Louisvillians, but why out-of-towners love coming to Louisville.
Yeah, it's very tied to our history.
And so, of the top 5 reasons that visitors cited for coming to Louisville, 3 involved historic properties. And so, the reason why, and they like the authenticity of these buildings.
Right.
They don't go out beyond the Snyder Freeway to look at Louisville.
Right.
They come inside the Waterson Expressway to see Louisville.
It ain't our fast food.
And a good example of all of this is Whiskey Row. Back at 12 or so years ago, the previous mayor wanted to demo Whiskey Row.
Can you imagine?
Tear it all down, literally tear it all down. We, along with NPP and several other groups, filed a lawsuit against that mayor. We won the case, and now Whiskey Row is one of the top, if not the top, visitor attraction in Louisville. Tremendous economic engine for this community, bourbonism and all that. For what it's worth, when that previous mayor, though, had a ribbon cutting about that development, guess who did not get an invitation? Ours was lost. Well, our invitation was lost in the mail, Martina. I don't know what happened to that. He took all the credit for saving Whiskey Row, and yet he was the one that wanted to demo the whole thing.
Well, that's what this is all about. It's about bringing people around, right? Calling them in to preservation. I think that's an important lesson, I suppose, about how we can move forward with this this fight, because certainly we can't go out and just purchase all the things we want to preserve. We need to bring in other people with wealth and power into understanding the value of historic preservation in so many different contexts here in our urban core. Right?
Colonial Gardens is another good example. See how they wanted to demo that for like a drugstore or something else in that area. And the council person for that district, Nicole George, at the time was in favor of demoing it. And at the ribbon cutting, when it was all finished, came up to me and said, "Boy, I'm so glad we saved this."
Wow,
You know, so it's bringing people around, understanding the economic viability of these structures.
But sometimes the battles are tough, though. I remember those early talks about Colonial Gardens and some of those meetings at Iroquois High School where folks got so heated
Very
and
contentious,
upset.
very contentious.
But it certainly is now a great asset to that neighborhood.
And you see it in all parts of our city. I mean, Germantown lost, right?
Right.
Myers lost just a block away here on Broadway, for example.
Yes.
All of our bourbon distilleries, except one, are in historic properties.
There you go.
So that's one thing. A lot of our hotels now are 21C, the Grady. They had talked about this Dream Hotel, which unfortunately may not happen, but they just went forward with the old Joe Lay's property, which is going to become a hotel.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of these the old Mirror Ball building there on Baxter is now a Myriad Hotel, I think it's called. So a lot of our hotels are in historic properties as well. The Brown Hotel just outside the window
here.
And the Silbach. I mean,
Gorgeous.
people like staying in those instead of these generic, bland structures.
Exactly.
And they like the authenticity as we come back to on that.
But in addition, because some folks get very, tense when we talk hotel, bourbon.
Right. What about affordable housing?
What about affordable housing? And we are a distance away from that. However, we do need to look at these neighborhoods. I call them the comeback neighborhoods. I remember when old Louisville was a mess. I remember when Cherokee, the road and the parts of the Highlands was not Clifton.
Yeah.
And these are neighborhoods that took it upon themselves to become historic preservation districts, and that movement was brought about by people who bought homes, who bought spaces in those neighborhoods. It was a local effort that brought those neighborhoods to the point where they are today. Nobody built a big Walmart or big anything in those neighborhoods. It was the people themselves that brought them back to life, and now they're just marvelous places to live.
We're talking about historic preservation and neighborhood planning here on Sustainability Now with Martina Kunnecke from Neighborhood Planning and Preservation and Steve Wiser of the Louisville Historical League. So there's all kinds of different contexts in which this comes up. What I'm sure you all get most charged up about, and me too, is when it's a question of our public property and what we're going to do with these amazing historic structures that are public property that then the city wants to offload, and it seems to just go into a developer's wet dream of let's tear it all down and start anew, right? And so there's one particular project that I'd love to spend some good time diving deep into today that has been kicked around since, I remember the first conversations in 2014, 15, something like that, but it's a property that has been vacant since 2016 now. And this, I'm talking about the Urban Government Center in my neighborhood, near Pairstown Point, between Barrett and Vine Streets along Breckenridge. Steve, you recently published in August a fantastic sort of op-ed giving a history of this. Like, it's been going so long that I've like forgotten a lot of the details. So I appreciate you pulling that all together, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes of the podcast version of this program at forwardradio.org. But do you want to give a brief overview of this project? What's happened since 2016?
Yes, in fact, I put together what's called an FAQ, a frequently asked questions.
There's a lot of questions.
A lot of people have forgotten the history of this. You're exactly right. It's been going on for 8 years plus, and very entangled. I started following it in the late 2019 region, 2020, got more involved in it, and have pretty much attended every public hearing since then.
Yeah.
And the residents I know there are extremely frustrated with the process.
Yeah.
So just briefly, in 2018, the city put out an RFP. They selected a developer to redo that area. For whatever reason, that deal fell apart in 2019. So in 2020, the city put out another RFP, which is request for proposal. There were 2 developers that submitted on that request for proposal, and both sought to save the historic old Kentucky Baptist Hospital structure, the landmark. They were going to save that middle green space there, which is like a park area, and provide a lot of great amenities there. That was great. So the city selected one developer, and for whatever reason, they could not come to terms on that. So now they've ended up with this current developer, which is called UPPT, which is Upper Pairstown Point Trust, UPPT. And so their proposal in 2020 for that RFP was fine. I mean, they showed some great things, and while we liked the other developer better, what UPPT was showing in 2020 was just as good, close as well. Well, since 2020 and now 2024, UPPT has drastically changed their development. No longer are they trying to save the landmark old hospital or even the green space. They are building a massive parking garage in the center, which is 6 stories tall, holds hundreds of cars, where that green space currently is. They're tearing down the historic old building. Now, we don't mind the modern additions to the hospital being demolished, but the older structures could easily be saved. So they're tearing everything on the site. They're going to clear cut and take it all down and build this suburban style mega complex there. That's going to house massive cars, people. It's going to make the neighborhood, surrounding neighborhood, very chaotic with all the cars coming in and out. Yeah. Again, we're for sustainability. I mean, why are we building massive parking garages at this time? So anyways, that's where we're at currently. So me and Martina have been attending all the resident meetings. We've been down to council several times. And everyone, probably 95% of what we hear are in favor of sustainability. They want the green space. They want to save the old landmark hospital building and all of that. But city council just has a deaf ear to that for whatever reason. You can come up with whatever reasons you think is going on here under the table. But anyways, they voted to go forward with the UPPT's current 2024 proposal. So me and Martina are discussing how to address that, and we'll hopefully have some answers here in the near future on that. But yes, very frustrating. It's been going on 8 years. It's tragic. I know right now that project over there has been graffitied, vandalized. If that was
that's new within the last few months.
If that was owned by a private developer, the city would be on them, asking, fining them, having them clean it up, all of that. But no, since the city owns it, for whatever reason, they're ignoring their own ordinances to minimize the graffiti and the vandalism over there. which we think they're trying to do to frustrate the residents to get them on board with the UPPT thing. We think there's an ulterior motive going on there. So anyways, we're involved in that. Martina and I have attended hours and hours of meetings on this. I know a lot of the residents have. We're all frustrated by it, and we just feel like we can't allow the city to do this to the local residents. And so we're working on some things that we hope to announce in the near future.
Okay,
on that.
Right. And when I just think about this project, I'm like, where do I begin? I guess so much frustration. But you didn't mention too. There's what is it? The nurses' college that used to house a police station and metro housing.
Yeah, and let me say, I come at this project from various angles. First of all, MPP has been at it since day one, so we're looking at, I guess, almost 7 or 8 years that this is being batted back and forth. And we've attempted to landmark it more than once and ran into some barriers. So.
And what does landmarking mean for our listeners who might not be deeply familiar with historic preservation?
Well, if we declare it a historic landmark, it provides some level of protection. Now, it could still be landmarked and still come down, but that adds a layer of protection. And from a historian's point of view, I am a community historian. The history of that site, the nursing school and the hospital, represent a period where there was a great transition from the days when people only went to the hospital if they were poor and just ready to die, to real widening the availability of high-tech medical opportunities for community. This was the era of community hospitals.
Yeah.
So we had one out near Eastern Parkway for St. Joseph's, I guess, and the Norton complex over in. So this particular property is one of the only surviving campuses of that type. They were part of the community. The nurses that went to the nursing school were participating in neighborhood baseball games.
Sure,
It was just a different era and a different time. I also come from it from the perspective of someone that lived there. I lived on East Breckenridge for several years. And so I remember the ambiance of that campus and how people felt like it was part of their neighborhood, felt free to walk through, had a real nice park-like feeling.
Very big mature
that
tree.
I think is more consistent with what we're trying to find. We're trying to build that back into our neighborhoods.
Exactly.
And finally, I think that there is a growing awareness that even though we want tourism to boom in this community, we also want locals to have the ambiance and the joy of life that we spend a lot of time trying to attract tourists and make things comfortable for them.
Yeah.
How about making sure our neighborhoods are comfortable?
Right.
And so as Steve has suggested, with this giant parking facility and whatnot, Parristown Point is probably the smallest community in Louisville.
Yeah.
And to push all that in that small space is not, long term, it's not going to be a good idea.
And when you hear the residents of Parristown talk about their neighborhood, it's already flooded with cars, and there's a lot of issues there with people coming in. And this is 10 times that problem of all that. So
yeah, that Parristown Hall development has definitely brought in a new element to the community, which I don't totally object to or anything, but what you're saying is right, that this is sort of more in that vein, which definitely will jeopardize the character of the neighborhood. And the reason I love that place is because it is so walkable, so quiet, right in the downtown. A great place for someone who's car free. Hop on a bus line nearby, right? Some of the most busiest
very
bus
affordable
lines
neighborhood, very affordable still.
Very affordable,
Nice shotgun structures in that area. So it's a beautiful little community, and this will turn everything upside down with this development.
And what have you heard the residents say that they would like to see this property become?
Well, in the RFP that was done in 2020, which by the way is legally enforceable, the city put in there a clause that relates to a Kentucky law that's called competitive negotiation.
Okay.
And so since 2 developers submitted on that RFP, there was a competitive negotiation as to who got it and all, and there's a process that if the scope of work changes or the scope of the project changes, the city and the developer have to go through certain hoops to do that sort of change, which we're kind of questioning whether or not that actually happened. Per se. But anyways, in that RFP, what they originally wanted to do was, what would the residents like to see? And the residents have indicated they want to see a grocery there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
They would love to do a library there, take it out of the Mid-City Mall and bring it over there and put it in there, the library. They wanted a playground facility, they wanted an urban garden there. They had all these great things that the community wanted, which that other developer that wasn't selected did have in their proposal. And this UPPT did have in their original proposal, they had it in there about the library and the grocery and all that. But somehow between 2020 and 2024, all those other amenities have disappeared from the UPPT proposal. It's now primarily a massive office, hotel, upscale residential. They're only doing 10% affordable housing, and that's only because we pretty much forced them to do affordable housing. If we weren't there pressing that, they would not even do that.
Of course, yeah.
But it was all upscale housing that's there, things that do not fit well within the context of that area, not what the residents really want. The residents want their landmark preserved and the amenities. One other thing that's falsely stated out there is as to why to tear down the landmark hospital is, they've been saying, well, it's got all these hazardous materials in it. It's got asbestos, it's got mold, it's got various things, lead paint and all that. Well, prior to demolition, you've got to remediate all of that. You've got to take it all out.
Yeah.
And even though the developer is, quote, paying for it, the developer is getting that money back. What we understand from the state of Kentucky is going to rebate them the money to remediate the facility. So yes, the developer is technically paying for the demo, but he's getting reimbursed by the taxpayers of Kentucky to do that.
Wow.
So there's a lot of false information going on out there about all this. And so anyways, if we're going to remediate it with our tax dollars, shouldn't we get some...
Can we keep it?
Shouldn't we get some benefit out of this? Can't we not just save the historic structure, the 1924 original building and the 1927 historic wings? And the city's already done a proposal back in 2017 of how it could be saved, of how it could be turned into either a hotel or residential affordable housing.
Yeah.
They've done actual layouts of how all that can be done.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tax credit money out there. I'm not a tax credit aficionado on this, but there's a lot of money out there that this current developer could use to turn that property around and save it. And so it bewilders us why they want to tear it all down.
Yeah.
But again, the hazardous material has to come out regardless of saving it or demoing it. So if we're saving it, let's at least have something to show for it.
Exactly. And just the idea of building office space in this current real estate environment, are you kidding me? Like, how could
We've got a lot of
finance
empty
for that?
office buildings downtown. By the way, I was just in New York City. I was telling Martina about this before I came in. I was there a week ago, and my hotel was right across from this massive office building. And at night, they left on the lights, totally
Nobody
empty.
home.
Nobody home. You can see right through the floors to the other side of the building, and we've got that happening here in Louisville as well.
Absolutely.
So why are we building, and the city is underfunding it with this TIF, tax increment financing, which we've not talked. We are subsidizing all of that. Why are we subsidizing this development that is generic, office and hotels? We're building tons of hotels in this community and they're not TIF based.
Exactly.
And office buildings are not TIF based.
Exactly.
What's going on with that? Why are we subsidizing this development? So if we're doing that for them, who's next going to come in? Another hotel, another office? They're going to want a TIF as well.
Not to mention that additional square footage of new office space in our urban core is only going to threaten existing office space like the one we're in here in the
Yes.
Abram building, which is historic and could be preserved and invested in, right, to fix it back up and make it marketable again. So
Don't get Martina started on TIFs.
I mean, we're just setting up a cascade of problems if we let this go through, right? It's not just the one site that is affected here.
Well, and just think about how much empty office space is just within a few blocks of where
Exactly.
we're sitting now.
Yeah.
And So it goes back, you know, we've been talking about preservation, but we also need to talk about how can we plan better as a community.
Right.
I mean, what you just described about it being in a walkable neighborhood.
Yeah.
I lived in Clifton I moved to Clifton at a point in time when it was not the best neighborhood. People said, "Oh, why are you moving there?" And by the time that I moved out in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, it had totally transformed. And that's because the redevelopment that occurred in Clifton was geared towards the needs of people who were buying to invest in small restaurants, shops, and a home in Clifton.
Yeah.
It was not to accommodate yet another hotel.
Right.
So I understand why big developers go the way that they do, because they're looking, the bottom line is very important to them, it's essential to them. And they're looking at ways that they can get a good return on their investment quickly. But unfortunately, that may be robbing our community of assets that could help us have bigger and stronger neighborhoods where folks are able to have a small business, to buy a home, to have a condominium that they can purchase. We're missing some opportunities here. So I'm hoping that as we continue through this tug of war, that there's going to be opportunities to have more fruitful conversations about how to smartly plan.
Talking about historic preservation and its impact on our communities and sustainability here on Sustainability Now with Martina Kunnecke from Neighborhood Planning and Preservation and Steve Wiser from the Louisville Historical League. We're taking a deep dive into the Urban Government Center in Paristown Point right now. You know, it's one thing to give away property. It's another thing to give away years of tax funding, right? And this is where the whole idea of a TIF, tax incremental financing, comes in. This has been used in our community in other projects, but in September, Metro Council passed a $20 million TIF for this particular project. Why is that problematic, and how should TIFs be used, if at all?
Well, MPP has been fighting and opposing TIFs long before people even knew what they were. And for a long time, we were just standing by ourselves, screaming and yelling about that. I have to hand it to the folks that fought the West End TIF, because those folks brought to our attention, first of all, this is probably the biggest TIF in the country.
Wow, the West End?
Yeah, the West End TIF. And secondly, hey, you know, what are we getting in return for these TIFs? So TIFs, for those that are listening, stand for tax incremental financing. And folks do not realize how many TIFs have been granted in this community. There's been controversy about the TIF that was associated with the soccer field, I guess.
Oh, yeah, soccer stadium.
Yeah, soccer stadium. Even the Yum Center has been problematic. Years ago, we were thrilled to hear that maybe that the 800 building, which is not very far from here, was probably not going to get a TIF, but it did get a TIF. And now we hear that there's a lot of short-term rental action going on there, where in their application for the TIF, they had said, we're going to do affordable housing. Because a lot of the people that were displaced from the 800 building were in the category of needing affordable housing.
Yeah, sure.
I wonder what has happened to those people, and what, again, this community is going to get in return for that tax break.
Yeah.
And I always thought TIFs were for public infrastructure. That what originally way I interpreted TIFs were like the Olmsted Parks. The Olmsted Parks were an original TIF. What they proposed back in the 1890s was putting in these parks that would then raise the property values around those parks, that would generate a lot of tax money, tax revenues, that would not only pay for the parks, but help fund the city as well. So that's how the parks were paid for and how the TIF was to work. That you put, like the Yum Center, I know it's been problematic, but that's for various other reasons as well. But the Yum was supposed to generate a lot of increased revenue around it.
That's the
even
theory, right? Yeah.
Well, even though I kept, during that process, I kept saying, well, 50% of your property is in the Ohio River. We're not going to put hotels north of the Yum. It should have gone where the old water company was. I was part of that fight. David Jones, John Schneider, all of us argued that it should go where the Omni Hotel currently. The Omni should have gone where the Yum is. The Omni would have been perfect where the Yum is, and the Yum should have been where the Omni is now.
Oh, interesting.
Because if the Yum was where the Omni is now, it would have helped 4th Street Live with all the activity around
Sure.
it. We would have had 360 degrees of property development around that, whereas now it's just generating just a small fraction of the TIF that it could be happening there. So anyways, but the Yum was a public infrastructure project that was to raise, but now they're funding these private developments like the Urban Government Center that are basically taking tax money from police departments, libraries, fire departments, all that tax money that was supposed to go to those entities is now going to this private developer to build all this upscale development projects.
Right,
It makes no
right.
sense. $20 million, I'm not sure what the break-even point is on this new development, when it will ever generate $20 million in taxes.
Yeah.
But I don't see it, and again, I'm not in favor of these, unless it is for a specific private development entity. For instance, if Google wanted to come here and put a headquarters here, okay, let's put in, they're bringing in thousands of employees, thousands of billions of dollars of revenue, okay, let's do it. But just bringing in something that is just, I hate to use scabbing, but taking from other entities, who's moving into, by the way, they've never announced who's moving into this office building they're building.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've never
Don't
announced
have
who
any
this
tenants.
hotel is going to be.
Right.
So, but we understand that the office building more than likely is going to be pulling off tenants from other properties here.
Yeah.
And it's going to be downgrading. It's minimizing our investment value in our community. My whole theory of everything is increase the investment value of Louisville, and landmark properties do that.
Yeah.
And even though we may demo some landmarks, I say replace them with a quality. I always, unfortunately in this community, we've had a process of demoing landmarks and putting up inferior valued buildings, lower quality that lower the investment. And I'm okay with demoing a landmark as long as you're putting up a new landmark that's going to increase the property values of this community.
Yeah.
That's sort of my model. I'm more of an urbanist than I am a preservationist. Okay,
Let me step in.
We do that. But regardless, these TIFs, due to this one especially, the Urban Government Center, or UGC as we call it, is taking money from our fire. So if you're listening to this and you're with the fire department, police department, library system, schools even, you should be upset with this, that they're giving this money to an upscale developer that is really hurting our community more so than helping it.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to jump
Yeah,
in?
okay,
here we
go.
And Steve knows this is coming. So we're going to fundamentally agree about some things in terms of, since MPP tried to save the water company building where Steve wanted to put the new stadium.
Yeah.
And so, but his point is well taken in terms of how about these public revenues that produce nothing for the community.
Yeah.
And we're sitting in a community now where we may lose our bus service.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't seem like any of these
Extra
tips
cash
or
to share with the
all
developer.
this cash that we're hoping will come from these new developments. It's not benefiting the community.
Yeah.
And we have profound needs as a community. If we want to be a world-class city,
Yeah.
we do need to have good public transportation. We do need to have so many of the things that we just don't have now as a community.
And the irony here is that the second developer who had this property for 2 years, and you, Steve, you said you didn't know what happened, why they weren't able to move forward. It was over a few $1 million that they were requesting from.
And I do know, but I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole.
So how come we're suddenly willing to give $20 million, a lot more, to this current developer that's not doing anything that the community wants?
And the main reason on that is it's spread out over 20 years. It's not spread out over 1 year like the other developer wanted. However, I've since learned that this other developer might still be interested, that due to all the tax credits and all that have since come forth, that he'd still be interested if need be, and he would not need that city subsidy.
No.
So.
And had tenants lined up, many interesting
phenomenal,
tenants.
yeah. Bellarmine University wanted to be a part of it, and several other
elder care facilities were a part of the
it was
really cool stuff.
Whereas this other UPPT, to my knowledge, Martina, correct me if I'm wrong, has yet to announce one tenant.
Not one tenant.
Wow.
And the other developer also had reached out to local businesses, small businesses, to have, on site. So, the bad thing is that we're in this nebulous place now, and we don't understand why things have happened as they have. The good thing is that at one point the city did reach out to the community and ask the community, will you vote on these various proposals?
Yes.
And the public did speak.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the city did not hear the public at that time. So I'm hoping that given where we are and what the possibilities are, that maybe we're going to go to a better place in terms of the final disposition of that property.
And the other little pieces of this is that there is a role for public involvement directly as a part of the legal RFP process, as you were describing, where I don't know what they call it, the council, right, of neighborhood associations needs to approve these plans, and they're not approving it, and so the developer's trying to go around it.
Right. Yeah, the CBA, the Community Benefits Agreement, is what you're referencing there. And yes, there were 5 neighborhood groups that were a part of that, and for whatever reason, the city jettisoned 4 of those groups and brought in actual entities that are part of the UPPT development.
Right.
Now the CBA is being controlled by the developer instead of the residents, and it's just, it's been turned totally upside down. So me and Martina are still working on this. We have not given up hope yet.
Well, you said you're going to come back. Maybe we'll have you back on the show in a few weeks and give us an update on things. But is there any role for our listeners to raise their voice at this point in this process?
Well, just keep aware that this is going on. Pay attention to what is happening. We're going to be reaching out in the future to give some.
So stay tuned.
You'll be seeing some news reports here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Put it that way, with more information about how, if anyone's interested in assisting us on this. But and that's the only way to get the city council to listen.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the city council's not listening to the residents.
Yeah.
They're listening to a small development group, and we want the residents to be heard.
Well, just a few minutes left. Unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our time. Are there any other projects you want to raise the listeners' attention to in terms of preservation that people should be on people's radar right now?
Well, preservation and smart development. MPP works with a variety of groups, community partners and groups around the community. And I do want to say something good about Metro Council, actually, that what we saw last year was Metro Council actually listening more closely to some of our communities in terms of raising a red flag about development that may not have been good for the community. So there's been a couple of very significant victories out in the south end of Louisville.
Oh, nice.
Where folks in the neighborhood said, hey, you promised us townhomes, for example, and now you're going to build 800 units?
Wow.
No.
Wow.
And so the neighborhood reached out, engaged in community partnerships, went before Metro Council and said, hey, you need to look at this. And so I've been really impressed with Metro Council on several things in the past year in terms of actually listening to the community.
Well, it's a good, positive note to end on.
There you go.
Perhaps. I want to thank you both for taking the time to join me here in the studio and giving us such a thorough update on the Urban Government Center and your work more broadly. We've been speaking with Martina Kunnecke of Neighborhood Planning and Preservation. You can find them on Facebook. And Steve Wiser of the Louisville Historical League, which you can find at louisvillehistoricalleague.org. Thank you both so much for your work and for taking the time today. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin.